essential part of creating a brilliant culture in your company comes down to getting the right people on the bus, building a team of people that align with your values, are great at what they do, and believe in your mission. A crucial skill required to do that is selecting the right candidates when you interview them. And therein lies the problem. Most hiring managers just aren't great interviewers, and they're even worse at making good hiring decisions. And even more problematic, the majority of them don't realise this and think they're fantastic. It's kind of like the old study which discovered that 93% of Americans rated themselves as above average drivers, although I expect the statistic for interviewers might be a little bit more extreme. And as a result of this belief in their own capability, many interviews end up being an unstructured, meandering chat, which varies in content from one candidate to the next. Without gathering consistent evidence around predefined criteria, any hiring decision is going to be challenging. Which is why structured interviews are so important to employ as you build your team. In a very well-cited Journal of Occupational Psychology study, structured interviews have been shown to be twice as accurate in predicting actual job success. In other words, by using them, you're twice as likely to hire someone who can actually deliver what you need in your open role. Structured interviews have also been shown to reduce bias in hiring processes and are far more defensible in court should any claims of discrimination or bias be brought against the company due to the consistency of questioning that they entail and all the associated documentation. So it's fair to say that using structured interviews is a good idea. But how exactly do they work? Well, in a structured interview, every candidate is asked the same set of predefined questions based on the competencies associated with the role. These can be technical competencies or values-based ones, and the same approach can actually be used for either. Candidates are then scored on the quality of their answer. Those scores are tallied, and the individuals with the highest score are hired or progress to the next stage. So the first part of that is the questions. These should be evidence-based questions looking for specific examples of the competency that they're being associated with. They'll often start with things like, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. Follow-up questions are fine, and you should use these to seek any clarification, detail, and nuance that you need. But each candidate is essentially asked the same set of questions by the interviewer. Now, criticism of structured interviews is that this approach is too rigid and won't allow for free-flowing conversation. But it's important to understand that these questions should be viewed as a framework and not a script. You're allowed to respond, react, discuss the candidate's answers, ask other questions as well, as long as you make sure that the same questions are asked in the course of your assessment of every candidate. You can ask them in a different order from one interview to the next if it makes sense to. All that matters is that they're the same questions and you ask them to every person you're considering. There must be some uniformity in the way the answers are assessed too, and this is where scorecards, which are an essential part of the structured interview toolkit, become really critical. A scorecard should contain each question you'll be asking, space to assign a numerical value to each answer, and room for notes. I'd normally recommend a scoring scale of 1 to 4 because this prevents interviewers from choosing 3 and sitting on the fence, with a score of 1 meaning no evidence of the competency and a score of 4 representing an excellent example. Make sure you make notes on the answer too because you'll be expected to explain your score later, so it's really important to know why you liked or didn't like what the candidate said. Now, once the interview's finished, you and your hiring team should sit and discuss the scores that you've given to each candidate. If there's any disagreement, this is where you use your notes to defend or perhaps amend your score. You'll need to set a bar as to what you consider an acceptable score, and what that is will depend on the number of questions, the scale you're using, and usually the level of role being hired into. And if a candidate's total score, once the result of each question is totaled, meets that bar, then they should progress. If it doesn't, they shouldn't. And if you're making a final hiring decision, any candidate who scores highly enough can be considered an acceptable hire. So unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, just choose the person with the highest score and make them an offer. Now, common debate arises as to whether competencies should be weighted differently, and in honesty, this depends on the specifics of the position. Generally, while I'd recommend avoiding inconsistent weighting, there are some roles, some highly technical ones, for example, where it would make sense to value one particular competency more highly than the others. Now, it's likely to take a bit of practice to get your scoring system right, a little bit of training and coaching to ensure your interviews are proficient, and good judgment in situations where the decision is tight. But with consistency and thoughtfulness, implementing structured interviews into your hiring process will be an absolutely key step in getting the right people on the bus as you create your brilliant company culture.